Whenever a piece of land is divided and new allotments are created, titles need to be issued. In South Australia, traditionally a conveyancer would help do this. A solicitor can also be used, however you may be paying a little more for the solicitor. If a conveyancer doesn't exist in your state or territory, you will have to use a solicitor. Roger Scott from Conveyancing Centre has been involved in conveyancing for some time now, and we're now going to have a chat with Roger to see what he has to say about the conveyancing process. Roger, you've been a conveyancer for some time now. You've done all of our conveyancing. How long have you been a conveyancer for?
Well, Angelo, I was first registered in 1980, and so that means I've been registered now for 29 years, and I reckon I've got about 10 or 15 years left in me.
What is the conveyancer's overall role in the development process?
Well, a conveyancer basically is the final link in the chain. All the other professionals have done their part of the work. The surveyor's done the plans, the lender's got himself involved and knows where he's going with regarding discharging of mortgages and lending again to the new entities if they're going to be new entities. And so now the plans have been lodged by the surveyor or given to us to lodge for registration. Those plans go through an approval process and get ready for deposit. So then we prepare the documentation which creates a division, creates the new titles. Now we have to deal with all the people who have an interest in the land. That includes lenders on the titles, lenders who are going to be on the new titles if we're going to change ownership during it. We need to get consents from those people and arrange for them to produce the titles. If the land's freehold, of course, then the developers themselves produce the titles. Once those titles are all brought together and our documentation is signed and consented to, we lodge those documents for registration at the Lands Titles Office, and eventually the titles are produced, and we arrange for the titles to go back to the lenders if they're involved, or freeholds back to the new people or the original developers.
And when does the conveyancer become involved in the process of land division?
Well, when the developer buys the property, he's obviously got to have a conveyancer to transfer the property to himself. We can be involved at that point. Sometimes we can give advice on the pitfalls to look for, but to guide the documentation, make sure we are aware of the surveyor who's doing the plans, but we really need to get ourselves involved after the plans are prepared, lodged or ready to lodge, so that we can prepare the documentation for registration.
So what is registration?
Registration is the authority given by the Lands Titles Registration Office to say to all the world that these are now the owners of these pieces of land. This is the size of the land. This is the new title.
Roger, in South Australia we have Torrens titles and community titles. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the Torrens title is the old, what other people would refer to as a freehold title. It's called a Torrens title because Robert Richard Torrens invented the system of registration and having a government-backed guarantee to ownership of the land. A community title is similar to a freehold title, but it has some responsibilities for ownership. All the lots within a community title scheme have a responsibility to each other, and they have a set of bylaws which you can read as a constitution. Those bylaws are registered with the Lands Titles Office and set out the rules under which the ownership is run. The community corporation is actually created at the time of the deposit of the community plan and gets a registered incorporation number, and it is responsible for ensuring that everybody in the ownership of the scheme actually obey the rules of the bylaws. They're also responsible for making sure that the common property covers third-party risk insurance, because if somebody is injured on the property within the development and has somebody to sue, they will sue the corporation, and the corporation has to have insurance to cover that. So the responsibilities are actually set out in the constitution for a community title. Responsibilities of a Torrens title are what the community expects, and there are no written rules. It's the rules of general law.
And what exactly does a conveyancer do in the land division process?
We create the documents which will create the titles. We need to take instructions from our client, get the documentation together and actually lodge it for registration so that we can actually evidence and confirm what the plan set out to do.
And tell me a bit about time delays. Can they be expected and should they be factored into the project?
In the development process, you should expect time delays in every sector of where you're going. I don't know of any development that actually went to the plan and the time span that somebody expected. So you can expect delays in council approvals along the way, but when we get to the actual plans, it depends on what's happening in the Lands Titles Office. Plans have to be lodged and go through to prove the data they're on, and our documents have to go through to be registered. There's an examination process to go through, and it depends on how much work they've actually got on. But you can normally expect about 4 weeks from lodgement of plan to approval, and about 4 weeks from documentation to registration and final deposit of the plan. Now, sometimes you can start those processes together, and so if we were aware of exactly what the plans were going to be, we could have our documentation ready. But a lot of times we only get the plan and we have to start from scratch, and so sometimes the plan doesn't get lodged because we have to collect the money to do so. We may lose 2 weeks along that way, which makes then the plan approval 6-week process. So yeah, you can expect delays, and we try and comply and get them in as soon as we can, but we also have delays getting approvals and consents from lenders. Sometimes there are obscure lenders and we have no idea how to contact them, and by the time we get them actually approved, and a recent one took me 8 weeks to get a lender to actually consent to the plan, so that just added 8 weeks into the scheme, so it was 12 weeks to get the registration.
So what is the Lands Titles Office?
The Lands Titles Office is actually the Lands Titles Registration Office. It's a government department which controls and regulates and holds for public record the ownership of land. It was actually brought about in the world in South Australia in 1858, when Robert Torrens actually used the scheme to perfect the system from what is known as the old system. The old system of land, you needed to evidence the ownership of your land by holding documentation, and the previous documentation over a period of 25 years. So if you owned a piece of land, you had documents that evidence that you owned it. When you sold it on to the next person, that transfer was collected with that documents, and you actually ended up with a pile of documents called the pie. The pie of documents is what you use for evidence. There was no guarantees to it. There could be fraud involved along the way, and you had no guarantee that the land you owned was actually yours. So Robert Richard Torrens took the system of ships registration, the Lloyd's registration of ships, where an office held the title and a register of the ownership of the ships, and a piece of paper called the title of the ship actually went with the ship. So that system was transferred to the ownership of land, and there is a central registration which has a copy of the land and the evidence of the land and the ownership, called a certificate of title, and the owner holds the duplicate certificate of title, and that is his government guaranteed piece of evidence that he owns that land. There are a lot less ways to involve fraud, and Section 69 of our Lands Titles Act actually protects anybody from any risk that there was fraud in the transaction before it, whereas the old system had no such protection.
And in the old system, if fraud was found, you could have potentially have lost the land.
Absolutely. If fraud was proved and somebody could prove their ownership, the courts of equity were sitting all the time, and of course the only people who make money in those places are lawyers, so that if you had to protect your interest, you needed to spend a lot of money to confirm that you owned it, and in the end you could be found to not own the land, yes.
And it could be taken away.
Absolutely can be taken away. It will be taken by the person who can prove a greater equity in the land than what you can.
And in conclusion?
Well, I think that anybody who's contemplating a development or doing a development should always consider themselves as to being a professional doing that work. They're working with people who are educationally qualified and registered to do their job. All surveyors are registered. The lending institutions obviously follow legislation. Conveyancers are registered and licensed, and so you should consider yourself as professionals. You should deal with them as professionals, expect to pay professional fees and be treated like that. But you should also have a group of professionals that you deal with that you become part of, and they all become part of the scheme, so that If you're talking to your surveyor knows who your conveyancer is and what he's going to do, and the surveyor knows what the conveyancer knows what the surveyor is doing, so he can expect to know what the plan system is going to be. He can talk to each other before the lodgement of the plan, so the documents can be prepared together. So my advice would be to develop a professional relationship with all the people that you're dealing with.
So it's absolutely worthwhile building up a good relationship with this team.
Oh yes, I agree. If you don't have a good team, you don't have a good result. You have a team with one bad link in the chain and you could run into problems, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree. Roger, thanks so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure, Angelo.
Thank you.